our friend Necturus or mud puppy, and I just got the whole ones. You can see that it's got some differentiation along the column. Basically, there's one vertebra at the front end that supports the head, and that would be the cervical vertebra called the atlas, exactly. Then there are trunk vertebrae running back for the trunk. If you look back at the hind limb, you can see, and I can't really point very well. I don't think this one comes off.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. It's all your fault. But you can see that the pelvic girdle connects to the ribs coming off of one vertebra, and that vertebra is the sacral vertebra, and that's the sacral ribs that connect to it. And it's not very distinctive. Like if you didn't see it mounted, you wouldn't be able to tell. But if you kind of look in there, you see the pelvic girdle connects, and that's the sacral vertebra and sacral rib. And then everything back behind that would be what kind of a vertebra?
Caudal.
Caudal. Okay. So what I did bring, so we can actually look at it a little bit better, is this little plastic block, which, as I mentioned, if you kind of look end on, you can actually see these vertebrae reasonably well. And so this is a trunk vertebra here. You can see the rib sticking off to the sides from it.
Mm-hmm.
See that okay? Do you guys want to move over a little bit, and then I won't have to rotate quite as far? Thanks. That would be helpful. Thanks. I know it's cozy, but Mackenzie's going to sneak around. All right. Wait, can you see anything? You don't have to get far away. Okay. So there's the ribs sticking off to the side. We can see the centrum or body of the vertebra here, and then the neural arch coming up. And what are we looking for? Vertebral canal or neural canal for the spinal cord running along. And spinous process sticking up. I'm just not going to worry too much about this. Cranial and caudal zygapophyses. So if we look at the vertebra here, it's a little hard to tell when you've also got one, but there's a couple articulated here. And basically this is posterior, this is anterior. These are the cranial zygapophyses at the front end and the caudal zygapophyses at the back end of the vertebra. For you guys, cranial zygapophyses and caudal zygapophyses. And remember, you can always tell because the cranial ones are facing up or in terms of the articular surface, and the caudal ones are facing down or out in terms of the articular surface of the zygapophysis. Okay. If we look at the thing sticking out to the side of the vertebra, then generally that's called a transverse process. But there's actually two parts to it. There's a part dorsally that articulates with the tubercle of the rib, and that's called the diapophysis. And then there's a part ventrally that articulates with the head of the rib, and that is called the parapophysis, which I did not write up on the board, but that's called the parapophysis. And that shows up better in Necturus than in any other critter we'll look at. And I don't know if you can see that all in the video, but hopefully so.
Parapophysis.
So, yeah, diapophysis above and parapophysis below. Okay. Do you see that at all? And those are just the two parts articulating with the tubercle of the rib above and the head of the rib below, the capitulum. Okay. And the ribs themselves have the head or capitulum ventrally, the tubercle dorsally, and then the body is just the main part of the rib. Okay, it's kind of hard to point to things on this Necturus vertebrae, but there you go. Okay, mammals. Mammals are nice because we have these beautiful preps. And I didn't grab a whole mammal to look at, but we can distinguish cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and caudal vertebrae in the mammal. And these preps don't have the caudal vertebrae, so here's the sacral vertebrae, and you can see in the cat, how many do you think there are there? This cat?
4.
Well,
how many bones are?
How many bones are fused in the sacrum? I only see 2 bumps.
Oh, 2 vertebrae? Is that your
I think it's, yeah. So I think there's 2 vertebrae. Sometimes it's 3. Cats can be 2 or 3 in the sacrum. So that's the sacrum there. And then we have the lumbar vertebrae here. I'm kind of going from behind forward just because it seems a little easier that way. So there's the lumbar vertebrae, We can follow them all the way forward. At some point, we get into thoracic vertebrae. And how are we going to tell the difference between a thoracic and a lumbar vertebra? What defines the difference between a thoracic and a lumbar vertebra?
I thought it was ribs.
I would agree. Ribs. So there's no ribs here. How are we going to tell if there were ribs when it was alive?
We look for the diapophysis. Like where the ribs.
We're going to look for a place where on the vertebra where the rib used to articulate. So this is a lumbar vertebra. This is a thoracic vertebra. And the head of the rib actually articulates in this region here, right where the two vertebrae come together. So right in here, you can see this kind of smooth surface. Shows up a little bit better on this vertebra forward, right in there. And that's where the head of the rib articulated. So that's a thoracic vertebra. This is a lumbar vertebra. And you'll notice the lumbar vertebra has this prong sticking off to the side, which we'll get to in a moment. Okay. So these are thoracic. This is the lumbar vertebra. And that has this prong. On these ones, you can see this little smooth area there, articular surface where the head of the rib articulated. Did I say head?
So that's not actually the diapophysis, right?
That is not.
Okay.
On these most posterior thoracic vertebrae, there is no diapophysis.
Okay.
So there's no tubercle on those
Just
ribs.
a rib articulation. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So those would be thoracic. And then if we go forward again, we get to the region of the cervical vertebrae. And find a good cervical vertebra. Here, all except the last cervical vertebra have something that's very useful to distinguish them. There's this hole here that goes in the transverse process. This is called the transverse foramen. And so when you see that, you know you have a cervical vertebra. The very last cervical vertebra does not have that, so just to be confusing. But it does have this little prong sticking off to the side. Okay? And this would be the first thoracic vertebra here. And the first thoracic vertebra, you can see very nicely a place for articulation of a rib with it. Okay. Cool. All right. So that's sort of the general characteristics. We look at a thoracic vertebra. I guess we can pick this one out here. There is a neural arch, kind of seen already. There is a spinous process. Okay. What's the hole called again?
The neural canal?
Neural canal, okay. Spinal canal, you could say too. Here, you guys want to be just a little quieter because the video soundtrack's going to get messed up. Thanks. They can hear me, but the video might get messed up. You can talk. It's okay. All right. Where were we? Spinal canal. Centrum. Notice that on these mammal vertebrae, the centrum has no cavity or swelling. It's just flat. So what do we call that? Axialus. So no cavity. Okay. That's typical for mammalian vertebrae.
Right.
Intervertebral discs, not visible. So they're not visible because they're not here. But if this was a live cat, there would be this pad of fibrocartilage between the two bodies of the vertebrae right there. And that's the intervertebral disc. That ties the vertebrae together. Okay, this is good to have them connected. The thoracic vertebrae, the zygapophyses, are a little bit hard to distinguish, but this is the front of the vertebra. Here's the cranial zygapophysis, this guy here. Okay. This is the back of the vertebra. There's the caudal zygapophysis, and you can see how that's facing down, whereas the cranial zygapophysis is facing up. Okay. Yes. You guys see that, Spencer? You look
Can you
confused.
point it out on the one in front of it?
This here would be the cranial zygapophysis and caudal zygapophysis. Good? Okay.